what we want to talk about today is a quote that Phil's been saying in a lot of the classes recently, but we've been going through this even since the Open Heaven Prayer School, really. And the original quote is, "Truth is relative to the observer." And the slight change now that I want to talk about is Phil is saying, well, perception is relative to the observer. So there's a one word difference there, but it's really huge. And I think it really comes down to some definitions here. And I'm going to go by the biblical understanding of both of these words. And the first one is, let's talk about truth. How would you define the word truth? I mean, we use it all the time. We all understand. None of us hear that word truth and wonder like, I'm not really sure what that means, but how would you actually define it? What would be a biblical definition for the word truth? So I think it's going to really help break down both these sayings and also give a lot of context the next time it comes up in a teaching too. Young lady with the mic, you want to give it a try?
I was going to put it over there. I could try.
How would you define truth?
Okay, I would define truth as something that's an actual occurrence rather than something that's perceived.
Okay. Here's the big hint.
Okay.
So you said a natural occurrence
An
actual occurrence rather than something that's perceived.
Correct.
According to who? That's going to be the thing that makes it
the truth.
It's truth, but according to who? Maybe you could say whose truth.
Yeah, I'm not
Anyone?
sure then.
Get it? Let's get it on the mic. Nice lady up front.
God's truth.
God's truth.
That he's the one and only that has truth.
Right. So that's the big difference between these two sayings. Because to say truth is relative to the observer is as if there's no such thing as absolute truth. But here's the problem with that statement. The world doesn't revolve around us, does it? Doesn't revolve around me, doesn't revolve around you, revolves around God. That's the truth. We may think everything revolves around us. We may relate to every single circumstance as if it revolves around us and we're the center of everything, and the reason everybody in the world does what they do is just simply because of us. But that would be false, wouldn't it? We look at it that way. We relate to most of our circumstances that way, oftentimes. But the truth is, God is the creator, and everything revolves around him. That's how these two statements are very different. Do you guys see that now? Mm-hmm. So to say truth is relative to the observer would be as if there's not an absolute truth, but there is. There's an absolute truth because, well, there's a God, and he created us, and he's the center of absolutely everything. So now we have this other saying that we're changing it to that's perception is relative to the observer. Ever been in a circumstance before? I know I've been in a lot of them where, say I'm doing conflict management, and one person comes to me and says, Mike, I got to tell you something. there was this huge blowout between me and this person, and this happened, and this happened. And I say, okay. And then person number 2 comes to me and says, you wouldn't believe this happened, and this happened. Both parties present for the thing that happened, 2 very different stories. Anyone ever have something like that happen to you before? Or like the example from earlier is you have the car accident. You might get a different story from the person who got rear-ended compared to the person who actually rear-ended the one in front of them. And it has everything to do with their perception. And perception we've described in a lot of our different classes as like a pair of glasses that you're wearing. And depending on your perception, it's a set of values by which to perceive your life with. This is really important because I want to talk about something that is so simple, but could save every one of us a whole lot of trouble. Like a lot of unneeded struggle and turmoil and even just fighting spiritually that you never really had to go through in the first place if you do this like one simple thing that I want to talk about today. Sounds good, right? But we got to lay a little bit of a foundation with some of this, and it does have a lot to do with this statement that no, perception is relative to the observer. So that kind of leads us to a place of if truth is really only when it's from a perception of God being the center, that means that just because you observe something and understand a set of circumstances a certain way doesn't necessarily make it truth. I mean, that's the next statement if we move this forward. Anyone ever think of a time where maybe you witnessed a certain event, like this example of the car accident, and you were so sure that things happened a certain way, things were said a certain way, or circumstances unfolded, and then you realize that you were looking at that set of circumstances in a way that was false to the truth. Maybe you made some assumptions about the circumstances or the other people involved, or maybe you were just looking at it in terms of a bad spirit. Happens to all of us all the time, right? So we realize something, that what makes an understanding about things truth is that it's a heavenly perspective. It's coming from God. It's seeing things in light of God being the center of all things. So with that said, we got to start thinking a little bit of like, where am I getting my information from? Because if you're wanting to be a person of truth, who's feeding you information? Like, what perception is feeding you that information? Because if it's not from God, you're going to come to a very different conclusion. Because you could have the same car accident with 3 different observers, and you could have one person who sees that car accident in terms of a spirit of fear. And they're going to notice really different things, won't they? Compared to somebody who sees it, say, from a haughty spirit. Someone who's really proud, elevated in their thinking. Say you take that same person who got rear-ended in this car accident. The fearful person is going to react very differently than the haughty person. Or how about the jealous, angry person? They're all going to have a very different experience from the same circumstance. So we have to start to think that if I know truth is not relative to the observer, truth is on the basis of how it revolves around God. So where am I getting my information from? If you had a physical person in front of you and you knew that that person was just a habitual liar, would you think twice before you believed everything that they said? I would think so. I would think that would be wisdom, right? So, are you breaking things down that way? Where you're thinking about the information you're receiving, and are you just trusting it because you see it, because you recognize it, or are you thinking for a moment, but what perception is this information coming from? You guys tracking with me so far? I'm just laying out some really basic things that when it comes down to how important it is for us to have a good perception, that there's a lot more to what we see than just simply the information, because when we're in those circumstances, you may be looking at things, say, out of a spirit of fear or a haughty spirit or a jealous spirit or whatever, but are you considering the source for a moment and thinking, even though everything inside of me wants to see this situation this way, maybe I should stop for a second and think truth is not relative, it's absolute. So I may be understanding the circumstance in a way that is true to my own perception, but it's not necessarily truth. You guys catch that? It might be true to my own perception of pride or jealousy, or I mean, we could name 100 other perceptions that tend to affect us, but to stop for a second and think, but is it actually the truth? So this is where I want to start sharing the tip here, and I want to give an example. And I want you to tell me, who do you think is going to do well in this circumstance? So I'm going to name 4 different kinds of people. Okay? You have one person who, I guess let me give you an example. Say the example is there's a person who like makes a big mistake about something. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. So let's say you have one person who just has no knowledge of what that person did. This is person number 1, okay? They have absolutely no knowledge. They weren't there. They didn't witness it. They have no information whatsoever. Okay, and then you have person number 1 who has all the information. They witnessed it, and they have really poor boundaries. Okay? Number 2, actually. Right. They have really poor boundaries. They get all up in everybody's business. They watch everything. They try and understand everything. They ask questions that they probably shouldn't be asking. They're not really good at staying in their garden. Okay? Person number 1, no information. Person number 2, bad boundaries. Person number 3 has got okay boundaries. Understands they have a problem and is maybe trying to not judge or see everything in light of how it affects them or try and have a spying spirit or get insight into people, but don't do really well all the time with it. And then you have person number 4, really good boundaries. Out of these 4 people, which one do you think is going to walk away judging that person who made a mistake? And which one do you think is going to mind their own business and just worry about the things they're supposed to be doing? Candidate 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 has no information, 2 has poor boundaries, 3 has mediocre boundaries, 4 has really good boundaries. You guys tracking the scenario here? Okay. So let's get it on the mic.
Number 1's gonna be the one judging because they have no ideas or they make their own assumptions of what happened.
But how could they make an assumption if they don't even know something happened?
People do that all the time. But I don't know. They
Okay.
just do. I've noticed. I mean, I've seen it happen and I've done it myself. So, and then person number 4 is the one that you know that you can trust to tell the truth.
Okay. So how about someone else? Go ahead.
I was going to say number 2 would be the one that would judge because they have bad boundaries, so they
Okay.
would be easier to pounce on something. And then I agree with Sylvia with number 4 would mind their own business.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in on what you think here? Someone mind bringing that over to?
What was your question? It was which one will.
Which one's gonna judge, or which one's gonna struggle?
The one that is gonna struggle, I think, number 2,
Okay.
and I think the person that is not gonna struggle and is gonna like mind their own business is number 1, and I think number 2 is gonna like.
Right. So, I'm gonna do a more concrete example. Okay, hypothetically speaking, a guy just walked in the cafe and was eating a bunch of barbecue ribs, and he was just going to town with these barbecue ribs, and he had sauce all over his face, and then he spilled barbecue sauce all over his shirt. The whole table was just covered in sauce and ribs and sides and just napkins everywhere. And then he walks up to somebody with his hands full of barbecue sauce and he shakes somebody's hand and then leaves.
Sounds like chaos.
Okay? If you were in here the whole time and you had no idea that guy ever walked in the building in the first place, would you have judged him? No, you wouldn't have, would you have? Because you didn't even know it was happening.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see.
But what about person number 2, who was sitting in the cafe and has poor boundaries?
Yeah. They would be the ones to judge the individual.
Yeah. more than likely, let's say person number 1 was in here, person number 2, 3, and 4 were all in the cafe. You know what that would look like? Person number 1 would have no struggles whatsoever because they're ignorant of the information. You can't judge something you don't know. Right? Person number 2 is probably going to stumble and really judge this guy. Person number 3 is probably going to really struggle because there's an image being projected on this guy now because number 2 is already judging. And then number 4 will probably struggle too, but just keep his eyes down and just say, you know what? Even though there's this really strong image all over this guy that wants me to judge him, and it's, you know, maybe hitting some moral boundaries, like don't go and shake somebody's hand when your hands are filthy after you just eat them, but just let them be. You guys see the example? So more times than not, person number 1 and person number 4 are going to be really successful. But you know what we don't know? We don't know how much person number 1 struggles with judging or taking things personal or jealousy. I didn't tell you guys. But did it matter? It didn't, did it? So person number 1 who just didn't have the information did just as good as person number 4 who did. Even if person number 1, say, had really bad boundaries. You guys see where I'm going with this a little bit? We've been talking a lot at these last series on Sunday nights and just being people of peace and being a community who has a respect for one another, who are being peacemakers. And I want you to think for a second, do you think that you would have an easier time spiritually if you made a conscious effort to just not collect information? Think about it. We don't judge and we don't take things personal if we don't have the information. And I'm going to create 2 little types of information here. There's critical information and there's non-critical information. Critical information might be, say, you're at work and you have a job to do and you go and you ask your boss something that is important to the task at hand. You call that critical information, or maybe we can say necessary information. Information that is important for you to be the person that you're called to be. And I think that's a good example because you're at work, and if we're trying to be in union with Christ and we want to not be divisive or just be independent in a way, but do something that's harmonious for the good of the team or the group and be that peacemaker, well, that's important information. And it's information that's within, I'm going to say, like, your pay grade, is important for you to be able to successfully be the person that you're called to be. And then there's non-critical information. Things that just really aren't important. Like taking note of, say, this guy who has sauce all over his hands. Is that important? Is that critical information to have? See, the person who doesn't have that information can't struggle with it. Or say you're in a place where there's two people having a conversation, and maybe you can kind of hear a little bit of what's being said. Well, if you're not a part of the conversation, I would say it's under non-critical information at that point. And what's going to happen to you if you take on that information? Well, you're naturally going to have to do something with it then. But you don't have to decide anything if you don't have it in the first place. See, person one can't struggle because they're not even in the same room. I just want you to think for a second, how often am I going through my circumstances assuming that truth is just relative to my perception rather than realizing that truth is absolute to God? And I'm collecting information, but if I'm collecting information and I'm seeing that information in terms of how it affects me, with me being the center, will you ever come to a proper conclusion with it? Can you come to a proper conclusion about it? And I think there's a lot of times where we're just gathering too much information. There was this story, I remember a friend of mine, and he got this brand new car. It was actually really nice. It was this brand new Nissan Maxima. It was white, and it was a really cool car. And I remember when he first got it, he was washing it all the time, and he would like keep it in the garage during the week, but then during the weekend, like pull it out in the driveway, like so everybody could see, like as they drove back. And there was a bit of covetousness going on. He was really, really into this car. And then, like a month later, he got really upset because he noticed that his neighbor bought the same car. Oh no. And what was originally like this prized possession, all of a sudden this like story started to like spin. He would go and look, say, there it is. He's got it in the driveway too. I know, he's just copying me. And now all of a sudden there's this war that's going on in his own mind. Does that make it true? Is the war real? Yeah, but it's not true. It's false to the truth. I have absolutely no idea what was going on in the mind of this neighbor. I have absolutely no idea. Maybe he never noticed the car in the first place. Maybe he wasn't trying to be provoking and he was like, wow, that guy's got good taste. Maybe he picked up on the covetousness all around the car and it's that guy's fault in the first place and that's why he bought one. I don't know.
Maybe he just liked the car.
There could be a lot of different situations going on here, but what was just his favorite car sitting into the driveway now turned into some sort of big neighborhood feud that was going on because they both bought the same car and were in the same neighborhood. And look, he left it in the driveway just like I know that he did this because of this. And what if this guy just didn't collect information? That doesn't mean you don't necessarily notice that your neighbor got a car, right? But you don't have to like collect information. You don't have to start deciding why he got the car, why he parked it there, and why he brings it out the same time that you bring your car out, and why he washes it 3 times more than you wash your car. He didn't need to collect information. See, he was collecting information as if truth was relative to him. But it wasn't. And because he was seeing things in light of truth being relative to just his own personal feelings and how everything affects him, he came to a lot of conclusions that were probably so far off from the truth and were so disturbing to his own soul over a stupid car. You guys see how that happens? But what if he just didn't gather information? And I've heard people say in the past, well, Mike, are you saying I just don't notice stuff anymore? You've never said that before, right? Does that mean I just don't know? I mean, I could hear the words that were being said. I noticed the car was sitting there in the driveway. You know, how could I not notice? They put it there and parked it right in the front just so I could notice, and washed it right as I drive home from work. But no, we don't have to collect information. And we want to work towards getting to a place where you have better and better boundaries, where you could just witness the world around you and not look at it in light of how it makes you feel and how everything affects you. But maybe you're not person number 4 yet. Maybe you still have some work to do in those boundaries, but you can do just as good as person number 1 if you just simply don't collect the information. You think that would save you a lot of struggle? If you just went out of your way, and as you go about your day, you don't have to necessarily take inventory. What everybody's saying, how everybody's responding, what they might or might not be thinking right now. Deciding what their motives are, why they probably said that or didn't say that. That's all information collecting, isn't it? Tell me this hasn't happened to you before. Someone said something to you, and then after thinking about it long and hard, you decided that it was an insult that they said that thing to you. And now you're really upset because I can't believe so-and-so just insulted me. But it might not even be true. It was after a thorough, psychological analysis of why they did everything that they did and what was really driving them and moving them. And I know them. I know why they do what they do and why they respond the way they respond. And when they said that, I know it sounded like a compliment, but it wasn't, because it didn't make me feel like it was a compliment. And they must have just had a really bad attitude, when they said it. And what is that going to do for you? What is a good outcome with that? Make you feel terrible, make you feel angry, make you feel insulted, make you feel divided, taking things personal. I would call that non-critical information, wouldn't you? What everybody else has going on inside of their heads and the things that they're all doing, does it really make our lives better when we straighten everybody out? It doesn't, does it? You know what makes our lives a lot better? When we just operate out of the truth. When we're a person who really focuses on, well, what is the source of my information here? Because if I'm just collecting information on the basis of how things affect me and make me feel, how am I not going to stumble? You're going to fall. It's almost inevitable at that point, isn't it? But if you're so bent on making sure that the information you collect is according to the truth, well, you're going to find yourself in a really good place, I think. So how do you get there? Well, if truth isn't relative to the observer, but it's absolute to God, you got to get quiet. You got to stop analyzing with your intellect the world around you. And given it doesn't just have to be about people. I think people's situations with people are the easiest to relate to, but it could just even be circumstances that are happening that nobody's a part of. It's just your life circumstances. And if you stop for a second and just think, well, truth is absolute. Am I collecting information right now that is only making life more difficult for me than it really needs to be? Because you can't really struggle with things that you're not aware of. So we got to be kind of careful. And that's also part of the reason we have to be a little careful as far as the media we consume, I want to say. It's the reason that just all the social networking is so dangerous. Just the Facebooks and Twitter and Instagram, and just because you see people posting these pictures or creating this facade, and then you gather information, and then you start to have certain ideas of like, this is what a happy life looks like. You're gathering non-critical information. Or this is what perfect body weight is supposed to look like, or perfect eating habits, or perfect lifestyle choices, or whatever. And then all of a sudden, we're not necessarily considering, well, truth is absolute to God. It's not relative to the observer. And you get really distorted because you gather all this information, but it's information from a bad source. It's information from a source that's just a habitual liar all the time. It's always wrong. Any information we gather that has us at the center of it is always false to the truth. Every time. Is that correct? Anyone disagree with that? It's always false. Every time. It's never been right, ever. And it never, ever will be right. Ever. Because truth is absolute to God. It is not relative to the observer. Perception is relative to the observer, not truth. Truth is absolute to God. Sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I think it's important. I just want to make sure you guys are with me. We got to consider where we're getting our information from, and it's good for us to be working on our boundaries, but if you put one boundary there that says, I need to be careful the kind of information I can collect, because that little bit of information can turn me from having a contentment and a fulfillment in my life to depression, self-absorbency, and heaviness because so-and-so has this and I don't, of which we were previously totally content and happy. What changed? Well, you took in a bad source of information. Now you got to deal with it and wrestle with it and say, I didn't know I wanted that thing, but now that I saw that that thing is really a thing, I really want it now. And now you got to deal with it and work through like detachment and like, Lord, would you please give me this thing, but I'm going to let go of it. And why can't this really it? But if you never collected the information, you could save yourself just a heck of a lot of trouble. You guys see what I'm saying? I think this is a really important part of us being people of peace. And we have to be really careful. It's why we've really tried as a church to stay away from just all the social media and be detached from some of that stuff, because it only stirs up all types of like covetous desires inside of our heart. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to still have to exercise really good boundaries and keep working in that area. But gosh, you could probably eliminate like 90% of the things you struggle with if you just didn't gather the information in the first place. You could drive by that guy's house, see the car in the parking lot, and yes, you'll see the car in the parking lot. Your eyes will physically recognize that there's a car in the parking lot. But you don't have to decide why he bought it. You don't have to take note of it. And maybe if that's a really sensitive area for you, don't look at it every time you drive home. I'm having such a hard time because this guy bought the same car that I bought. Yeah, but you're walking up to his garage. You're staring into the windows, watching to see if it's still in there. It's like, who's to blame here? Well, don't look through the window. You can still, okay, yeah, it's there. But do you see how it's a huge, violation of this neighbor's personal space? When he's, deciding all the different reasons that he bought this silly car? That's collecting information. I think sometimes we think it's just something physical. But he's collecting information to motives and intentions and drawing up this whole story, and then he's got to deal with it. It was really disturbing. And you know what else happened? Same things that happens to every one of us when we take in too information. He started to not like the car anymore. Did the car change? No. It was still a really nice car. But all of a sudden, he was discontent and it just wasn't, he didn't appreciate it anymore. See, that's what happens to us. God's given us these really beautiful lives, and then we just collect a little too much information, and all of a sudden, our life just starts to look like trash. Because it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not this, but we like to look at everybody else's life with all the benefits, void of all the problems. Everybody's got problems. Everybody's got struggles to deal with, and we really have a habit sometimes of collecting all the information that seems really positive without really looking at the negatives or being able to relate to. Everybody's got something that they're dealing with that's hard to work through and is a challenge. And I just absolutely love when Phil talks about even that jealousy in terms of like it's my life and these are my problems, and I love them. I don't want somebody else's problems. Like this is my life. I think it's a really incredible outlook to have. And I just want you to think maybe you're letting yourself off the hook a little bit and saying, well, how could I not see the car that was parked in the driveway? I noticed it. It's not like I can drive home and not notice it. Yeah, that's true. But there's a difference between noticing it and getting out of your car, looking through the window in the garage and deciding all their motives, reasonings, intentions, and exploring this huge scenario. There's a big difference between the two. We don't need to collect that kind of information. Do you think that if you let go of collecting what I'm calling non-critical information, do you think your life will be worse off? Do you think that it's all that non-critical information that you're gathering that's really keeping you afloat? Keeping people from screwing you over or taking advantage of you or whatever? Do you think your life would be a little better if you just collect a little less information? Maybe you let people win. Maybe you won't even know that you let them win because you didn't collect the information to find out. I think we could just be so much more peaceful if that was the case. And I think we also have to be careful, like the flip side of it is that scripture we talked about, Phil brought up on Sunday too, was let every word and deed be an oracle of God. We also need to be careful of the kind of information we're giving. And is it really inspired by God, or is it to give information to provoke? Kind of goes both ways, I think, doesn't it? We can be sensitive to each other that way and saying, am I saying something right now that is meant to be provoking? Because I want them to see how great I got it and cause them to stumble? That's kind of bad too. It's quite bad, right? Information is really a big deal, and we have to remember that truth is absolute to God. It is not relative to the observer because he's the center of everything and we're not. Do you have any clue how much information you collected this week that was with you at the center of it? I mean, think about it. How many observations did you make? Feelings did you understand? Things that you just collected from the world around you that you saw in terms of how it made you feel, believed it as truth rather than checking your source, and then had to struggle way more than you really needed to because you believed it as truth. That is exhausting. You guys see what I'm saying? That is exhausting. And maybe you're working towards being person 4, but if you just like cut it off right in the beginning, I don't need to collect the information. Or there's these things that we call probative questions sometimes, where we're asking questions to prove a certain hypothesis that we developed inside of our mind of why somebody's really doing what they're doing, and may try and sound like it's a really innocent question, but it's not. It's to gather information. Always bites us every single time. It doesn't help us. We have more information as a society than we've ever had in the history of the world. Is it causing us to become more pure? Not really, is it? We can just have like a simple life. Maybe you'll encounter a lot of people who will decide they're better than you, or decide that they were really right, or judge you, or whatever. Does it matter? Does it really make us happier because we know people are thinking really well of us rather than thinking really poorly of us? Doesn't really matter. Because if you see God as the absolute, as the center of all things, and you have a clean conscience that you're doing the things that God wants you to do, you're just not going to care what people think. It just won't matter to you because you'll know something that they don't know. You know what that is? They're false to the truth. Right? They can judge you all they want, but if it's false, why did it bother you? Right? I mean, it's kind of simple, isn't it? If you feel you have a clean conscience and you have God's absolute truth validating you inside of your own heart that you're doing the things you're supposed to be doing, I promise you it's really not going to bother you that much if people win, or if they look down on you, or treat you poorly, or whatever. It actually just really won't bother you that much, because you'll realize that their perception's false to the truth anyways, because your own conscience testifies differently. Because God's truth is absolute. But collect a lot of information, find out every little thought, and try and figure out every single thing that every person around you is thinking and how they're relating to you, and get ready for a world of turmoil. And we don't have to explore that because we've all experienced it, right? Every one of us, we've all been there, done that. We know what that's like, and never turned out good for me. Ever turned out good for you guys?
Nope.
All right, well, that's all I got for tonight, but I just thought it might be a really good tip. Why wrestle so hard when you could just skip the wrestling match? You don't have to be a good wrestler then. You just don't get in the ring. And you don't get beat up. All right, can I just hear a couple comments?
So, Mike, you while you're going through it, I had some memories come to me that I'm part of the Historical Society in Huntley, and once in a while when we have meetings or programs and stuff, somebody will tell a story, and then there's other people that disagree with that, or then they're debating what really happened. And I've seen people post stuff on our Facebook page, and I sit there and I think, that's not what happened. But then I feel like, well, I'm not going to argue. It's just not worth it. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And there's a chance I perceived it wrong. So, but you definitely see two people going at it, and you're just like, what's the point?
Yeah. And I think that part of it is a really healthy attitude for us to have. There's a chance that I perceive this wrong.
Yeah.
Like, let me check my information here. Am I getting this from God, or am I getting this from a perception that sees myself as the center of it? And if that's where it's coming from, it's false, no matter what you saw with your eyes. So that's good. Anyone else? Go ahead, Isabella.
So this teaching is really just opening my eyes on how much and how often I do collect non-critical information all the time,
Make
everywhere.
life a lot harder than it needs to be.
Yeah. And like I don't use social media anymore, but I'm like looking back and realizing how that affected me growing up, like in high school. Like just, oh, that person looks amazing in this outfit at that place. Like, you know,
Right.
you collect all this information you don't even need to know. And even now, like just overhearing a conversation or like, I don't know, even when I'm driving or something, like the way people are driving or I don't know, like really dumb stuff is just coming to
You
my
can
mind.
recognize it's happening, but you don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to
Exactly.
explore it. You don't have to judge it, decide how you feel about it, and look into it. You just
Come to a conclusion.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just all leads to a bad place every time.
Yeah. So just gotta like think about God and like what he wants me to think about and not just dwell and dwell and dwell on it, whatever
Right.
it is. Doesn't involve me. The world doesn't revolve around me. And
Yeah.
when you said that, like it just was like, wow, I can think of hundreds, thousands of times today that I let things revolve around me and not around God. And it's not the truth. So
Anyone else?
I think recognizing that used to be my life. I mean, it's funny, but you joke about the guy with the car. If I walk outside and somebody was wearing the same thing that I was wearing, I will go to a store, get a new outfit, and throw away the one that I'm wearing, and just hate it. And I not only that, but I will always feed information to people who was always willing to eat the information that I will feed in order for them to do what I want them to do. So kind of like I will lead people to the decisions that I wanted to take. And it's just like, and it's so like, it's a horrible way to live. And I just think like right now, it's not like I do that like so like in a such a big way, but you still do it. You still look around, you still see what people is doing, and you still make your own decisions. You still make your own like stipulation. This is what I'm gonna do. This is what I'm gonna eat. This is what I'm gonna like watch. And it's just like, and like you say, life it should be so much easier if I just close my eyes and I focus on God and make Him the center of my universe.
Right.
And what is right is what He say is right, and what is wrong is what He say is wrong. And if my like contentment is to be like right with Him, my life it will be so much easier. Just like I can say like, oh, my life is so much better because I'm not that person than I used to be. But it's just like, no, I will be lying to myself. I'm still making my own decision. I still like look around and make my own decisions based on like what I'm looking around. Just like I just really like if I make God the center of my universe and He is the only one who matters, my life is gonna be so much easier and so much content. So I just thought it was a great message. Nothing new, nothing then it's just like a new like revelation, but like explaining so much like simplicity, and you just make you think like, wow, actually I can make my life a lot more easier than what I have right now.
Right. Good. Anyone else? Kaylee sent in a text, said, She has said very powerful. I like the analogy of the car accident and people with different spirits viewing the whole situation way differently. I like too that you said if you don't know or don't try and get the information, you can stay at peace. I feel like it's so natural for me to seek out as much info as I can. I can definitely work on just letting myself be on a need to know basis and as a result stay at peace. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and I think like you said, Javier, it's we know and we've done a lot of teachings of like, hey, keep your eyes down. You know, like when that person spills mustard all over their shirt, it's like just keep your eyes down. You don't have to make a spectacle out of it. But I just thought this was a really fitting thing we've talked about many times, but just at this moment, you know, in our community to look at again and just think, am I making my life a lot more difficult than it really needs to be because I'm just collecting too much information from a source that's just always false to the truth? And the answer is yes, we all are. And we can all do a better job at that, I think. So, you want to pass the mic, Joe?
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I know I've done that a lot of my life too, pretty much all my life. But and it's a really good message because if you look at it that way, then you have less struggles and you're more at peace. And I really like what you said that, like when, let's say, you know, if we think too much of, even when it comes to people's opinion about you and stuff like that, what does it really matter? Like, I know that's been like a big thing for me because I think that if, you know, a certain person treats me a certain way, they like me, and if they don't like me and stuff like that. But it really doesn't matter because, well, and that's not the issue. I'm saying, like, if people judge me or whatever it may be, um, you know, that if I know the truth, if I have a pure heart and I know the truth of how God looks at me, or yeah, somehow you said it something like that. I can't remember.
If you have a clean conscience and you know you're doing what you're doing as God being the absolute truth, then
Yeah,
it's not going to bother you so much because
yeah,
you'll know that other people's feelings are, well, they're false to the truth
yeah, that
because
people's
it's based on
feelings.
how it affects them.
Right,
And why give
right.
someone who is so self-absorbed and self-centered a power, or why should they have a say on our own value as a
And
person?
that's it.
Like, why would
That's
we want
what
to give somebody that kind of like
power.
power or responsibility in our lives when God's the only one who can really make a good decision about that because he is truth.
Yeah, sure. That really like struck me. I thought that was really powerful. I mean, the whole thing, but
Yeah,
like that's been like one of my biggest issues. So I really like. I'm like, oh yeah, his opinion is the one that matters the most.
right,
And if I have a clean heart, then I can just rest on that.
right,
And so I really, really like that. And just even the whole thing of like viewing the way I see things. If I see things that how they affect me, then I collect all the information, which I've done and I do still. And so that's really good to like remember, like, no, put your eyes down. Even at Jewel, no, put your eyes down.
right.
No, put your eyes down.
It's non-critical information.
It's non-critical information. So I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah, good. And it never turns out good. Like we decide the person really likes us, and then we go to this deluded, like inflated,
I
prideful
know.
place, or they don't like us, and then we fall into a pit of despair. I can't believe they would think this, but it's all false.
Right. Because what
Anyways.
if they had a bad day and they
And
don't
then,
treat you
yeah,
like
and then the
same
next
way
day
that-
you decided, oh my gosh, they really like you because this thing happened. And then the next day, they forget to say hi or something. And it's like, I knew it. They don't like me. And it's like, it's a roller coaster.
Yes.
And it's all false.
Oh my gosh.
It's all false.
yes.
You never land in that place of contentment of like, oh, I know that they really are my friend. And then like, you're done. It's just, well, the next time they do anything that's like remotely like shady, all of a sudden it's like, I knew they hated me all along. And it's,
Or they don't like me
Yeah,
anymore. I
it's-
even experienced that today. At work, there was this lady and her mom that always come to Jewel, and they're like, every time they see me, they're like, hi, oh my gosh, and they're like really sweet. And then, which they were when they first came in, but then I don't know, like I was working with someone, and I looked at the one lady, and then she looked at me, and like in my own mind, I thought, like afterwards, after that encounter of looking at each other while I was working with someone else, like her attitude changed. And I took it so personal.
right.
I'm like, oh no, what did I do? Did I do something wrong? Did she like not want me to look at her? Did she think that I was all these things went through my mind. I'm like, stop it. Just stop it. It's okay. Whatever happened, maybe she had a thought in her mind that that when I said goodbye, she wasn't focused on what
Right,
I was saying.
We
I
just
don't
come to
know.
the right conclusion. I was thinking
Yeah.
there was this TikTok that I saw, and it was at a gym, where they were lifting weights and stuff, and there was this guy sitting there and this girl that was working out, and he was just like staring right at her, and she started to like freak out. Like, stop staring at me, you're checking me out while I'm working out. And she went to the manager in charge of the gym and was like, you need to kick this guy out of here. And they started to get really angry at him, and they approach him, and finally he goes, I'm blind.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
That was false to the truth, wasn't
That
it?
was completely false to
Yeah.
the truth. Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah. So
It's
you
just
do that
there's
all
so
the
many things, like
time.
you don't know what's going on.
No, we
He's just a
don't.
blind guy sitting there. He doesn't know what he's looking at. But we decide so many things and come up and collect so much information
Yeah.
to just be really wrong all the time.
Yeah.
And it's always wrong every time.
Every
We don't
time.
believe that yet, though. I'm
Not
just saying,
quite,
we don't
way.
believe that
No, we
it's
know
always
it
false to the truth
intellectually,
if it's
but-
based on how it revolves around you. I'm telling you, we don't believe that yet. Intellectually,
We do.
you
know.
see, okay, well, yeah, I know God's absolute truth, and when I see things in light of how they affect me, it's not. But I'm telling you, you don't believe that as much as you think you do,
Yeah.
because we still think we're
Otherwise,
right
we wouldn't
when
be.
we observe things. But I felt this. But I saw them do this and say that. And we still trust it, even if we know it's based on how it affects us. But the more humble we get and the more we let go of control and realize that we really do need the Holy Spirit to guide us, we make less fools of ourselves like this woman did at the gym.
Wow.
So,
Pretty wild.
yeah. Okay, well, let's close in prayer. Lord, we are so grateful that you are God, that you are the center of all things, and you're an unselfish, just loving, gracious God. You are truth, and it is absolute. Lord, forgive us for all the times we collected information but trusted a untrustworthy source that was false to the truth. And Lord, I pray that you would help us to grow as a community to just search you out, to just get a sense of you and trust in the things that you're saying in light of how they revolve around you and not us. And Lord, we just pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.